Hi again, everybody. It's Philosophical Phoenix, back with more on the balance of opposites. Today it's going to be more. Hi, Angela. That's Angela. Life and death, good and evil, just little things like that. Um, I'm a druid, so of course I look first to the trees and to the wider natural world for my life lessons. Um, and when my three children were young, we were blessed enough to live in a redwood forest for a few years, and we would often go for walks and in the forest, and sometimes we even went at night without lights of any kind with us. Um, I mean, for emergency, we had a flashlight, but we we walked in the dark. Um, and it really taught us a lot how much sensory perception will adapt to darkness. Um, it actually got so that the porch lights of the houses we passed were intensely, almost unbearably bright, like tiny stars going supernova in our eyeballs. And the trees would start to glow a little bit, and even the asphalt had a little bit of a glow to it almost as we walked. So it was quite a learning experience just to walk in the dark that way among the trees, who are my greatest teachers. A lot of them anyway. Um, anyway, slight tangent there. But one of these times, I asked my kids to look around and see whether they thought the forest around us was made of more life or more death. And the longer we looked, and myself included, um, the more we studied it, looked at the earth and all the living things it sustains, the more we realized that without one, the other would not exist either. Life is dependent on death, and we don't like to look at that because it is disturbing to us as mortal creatures. Um, However, the earth itself, of course, we all know it's made of broken down matter from dead creatures, whether plants or animals, that once lived, and they now provide nourishment for new life to emerge. The soil itself is composed of the remains of once living creatures. Um, and we see, the roots of plants, of course, but also the network of mycelium, the tiny fungal growths that trees actually use to communicate with each other. Um, that was a really fascinating find pretty recently for science. So that was really cool. Um, so death, and yes, I admit I have some goth proclivities. I was actually goth in the 80s before it was that cool to be goth. I wasn't allowed to be, so it was kind of hidden. I would hide t-shirts and put them on when I got to school, or, stupid stuff like that. Anyway, um, uh, the fact of death is a little difficult to confront with objectivity, or at least the best we can do for objectivity. Um, and we know, often to our sorrow, nothing that lives is able to perpetuate its own life without bringing death to other living things. Um, we sustain our lives by consuming the remains of what has recently died. You can go vegan and be perfect in your diet, in not eating anything related to animals, but still, even then, you are killing plants to keep your own life sustained. And every time you breathe, you kill colonies of microorganisms that are in the air. Every time you bathe, you're murdering colonies of these little bacteria that live on your skin, beneficial and not. that's not really the point. It's life. And in order to perpetuate our own, we do bring death to thousands upon thousands every day, each one of us. And that's just the way it is in this realm that we live in. And of course, one day, in turn, we ourselves will sustain the lives of countless others after biological death breaks down these meat suits that we are currently piloting. Um, and that's all they are. They're meat suits. And we need to take good care of them and love them because they are a gift. But that is what they are. No more, no less. Humanity, as a species, we crave immortality. Whether we, embrace the concept of an eternal soul and shore it up with whatever religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs, or if you are atheist in inclination, it's just our fundamental survival instinct that evokes this yearning for eternity. Um, Therefore, we just aspire to leave a legacy at least. And the Abrahamic faiths have long been predominant in the West, most of all Christianity, of course, which is also the one that I have the most experience with. Um, so when I speak, I'm not referring to all Abrahamic faiths equally, and I'm not referring to all Christians equally. Um, that's the disclaimer. However, these monotheistic faiths have given rise to so much that is beautiful and good. Um, Architecture is one example that's really easy. Temples, mosques, cathedrals, all of these are gorgeous buildings of incredible talent in how they're built, and they're works of art in honor of their God. Um, and of course, they're also known for some of them for philanthropic endeavors, for working with the poor, trying to alleviate hunger, and obeying what Jesus said to do, essentially. Mother Teresa is one famous example, although, again, disclaimer, I am aware that there have been discoveries that sort of maybe qualified some of her and her work, but we'll leave that alone. Um, so I don't have a problem with these faiths in and of themselves, and they have a lot of good in them, but they have this rigid dualistic structure of life being an ongoing war between good and evil, life and death, etc. There's this widespread central failure to embrace the reality of what, where, who, how, when, and why we are as humans. For example, Christian scripture, death is called the last enemy. And of course, Christ is supposedly the one who conquered it on the behalf of believers. So we see, death is a last enemy, and we can't hope to conquer it. So therefore, we put our faith in an all-powerful deity who can and will and has. And that's essentially Christianity. And yet, really viewing death as an enemy is just going to create greater misery and greater despair when inevitably it does separate us from all of the living creatures that we love. Grief, again, I said it last time, grief is the price of love. It's not more and not less than that. And the more dearly we love, the more dearly we're going to pay in sorrow upon the separation that death inevitably brings. And I know this is not a barrel of laughs, but go to Comedy Central if that's what you would like. So we seek to comfort ourselves in so many ways, through many faiths, pursuing all of these myriad paths in this unkillable hope of finding proof that the separation death brings is just temporary. Maybe we learn to accept death as permanent. or we may build a faith in some more desirable afterlife. I don't actually believe that it matters. I used to. um, but I don't believe it matters anymore in any ultimate sense what we choose to believe about origins, where we came from, the creation of the universe, um, about life after death, or about the divine, since we can't ultimately prove any of our chosen beliefs in a truly objective sense. We covered a little bit of this with the fact that humans are subjective creatures by nature. I really tried for all of my young life to believe in this rabid, insistent, only truthism of the toxic brand of Christianity that I grew up with. And just ended up feeling foolish that when I actually examined all this evidence that they claim in favor of their faith, it actually falls far short of its claims. So it's not absolute proof by any definition, in my opinion. I used to debate it on the side of Christianity, so I really looked for into the evidence, and personally, I just don't see it. It's just not. It doesn't hold up. So that's not really the point, though. Personal experience aside, no one who's confined within a closed system or structure without any universally clear to everyone lines of communication to whatever's outside, if anything, none of it has any real basis to claim objective knowledge of truth. None of us human beings can tell anyone else, any other human being, with real certainty what it is that lies beyond our very limited reach as a species. And we don't have to look any further than the first law of thermodynamics to see how science itself actually upholds this. And this is elementary school science, the law of conservation of energy. So it just states, and I'm quoting, Wikipedia, but the total energy of any isolated system which cannot exchange energy or matter is constant. Energy can be transformed from one form to another, but cannot be created nor destroyed. And, that's why we spend sorry, my lip looked odd. But that's why we spend time in an elementary science classroom learning about solid, liquid, gas. And of course, H2O is the standard example. As a liquid, it's water. As gas, it's steam. And as solid, it's ice. And that is just the example of how energy can change forms, but it doesn't change essence. So, assuming that we all can agree at least on that much, life as we know it constitutes a closed system to the extent of our current knowledge. Therefore, the argument, does God exist, is pointless from the outset. One moment. I apologize. I had cat TV on for my cats to watch, and a commercial came on. So, where were we? So yeah, the argument, does God exist, is pointless from the outset, just because, given the conditions of our existence, no clear determination can be made either way, for or against a God's existence. And that's after we address the vast shades of meaning each of us attaches to the subjective word of God or gods or deity. We all mean something different by that, even if we share the same faith. I personally choose my beliefs as a pagan druid, not because I think they're superior or absolute in any sense, but because those beliefs are the best response that I can give to the evidence that I do see. reflected in this beautiful but terrible and terrifying world that we live in. I find that I can learn and grow far better by accepting what I know to be limited beliefs instead of insisting on an absolute knowledge of reality that is, get ready for it, unrealistic in its expectations by any measure of available data. You've got to be very objective when looking at deeply personal things like faith in our modern society. Get into that a bit later. But so I embrace my beliefs, even knowing that they're limited and not absolute, and they're not going to be what everyone needs. But I do embrace them because that is the nature of all knowledge. But because they offer me a knowledge and a wisdom far beyond what I actually have now. Um, so basically, the wisdom and knowledge available to me as a pagan druid gets results because it meets me where I am now as a human on a path, rather than requiring any leaps of blind faith followed by these harmful claims of exclusivism, which really only arise from the secret fear of knowing that any absolute claims we make are inherently unsupported and unsupportable with what we know right now. It's much better and more honest to just admit when we don't know something, but it's also a lot scarier when we demand this rigid structure that is actually unworkable in our experience on this planet. So, whenever someone claims to know what is unknowable simply because they believe it so strongly, that's just fear speaking. The kind of fear that can and way too often does give birth to anger, then to hate, and finally to violence. In many cases, far too many, even today. So, we see the emotional reactions of believers in any faith to unbelievers. And I get defensive emotionally of my gods and goddesses and my path. And I know it seems really foolish to many. So I understand the urge to defend whatever faith you hold. I was even more defensive of Christianity when I was trying to believe it, because of that fear of not really thinking that it holds up. These reactions of believers to unbelievers are really emotional and often way out of proportion. And yet, every spiritual leader, from Jesus to Buddha, urges a path of fear's exact opposite, which is love. That actually I can back up with a partial Bible quote that I actually do agree with in Romans. That popular one, perfect love casts out all kinds of fears, all fears. It is likely, in my opinion, that if most believers of any faith actually use the tools of their faith properly, to learn the lessons of their soul's particular journey, we as a species could naturally, eventually relax, all of us, into a harmonious diversity of beliefs and non-beliefs, weaving this complete tapestry of the perfect beauty that we yearn for. We could actually do that, and hopefully one day we will. Religious arguments would finally be understood as pointless, and therefore just die off without further violence in their completely unnecessary defense. In the end, I do find that in the natural world around us, rebirth is just as inevitable as death and life. The spiral shows itself to us everywhere, and yet we so often miss the promise of a continuing cycle. Whether that's infinite or finite, again, can't be proved. But I don't personally believe that science is ever going to find definitive proof of an immortal soul or the more perfect afterlife that we yearn for. because it's not necessary. We are on this spiral, this journey, whether or not we recognize it. Um, the reality doesn't change, seasons change, yet stay the same. Matter and energy, the building blocks of our reality, again, can't be created, can't be destroyed. And it's the details of what rebirth actually preserves in what has lived and died that tends to really be another point that people get emotional or hung up on, that is not conclusively knowable at this stage of human development. And it leads to these disagreements about what a soul is, and if it exists, and if so, what the limits of its existence are. Um, Everybody pretty much has their own opinion on this, and I believe that's how it should be. Um, the knowledge we're given does not give us one single solid answer. So, I used to enjoy a good debate, but this modern society, we all seem unable to do that, including me. I will admit that it's more difficult now than it used to be to not get emotional, to not have an emotional reaction immediately to any challenge, to dearly held beliefs, um, our own pet notions. We tend to reflexively answer every challenge, no matter what or who it's coming from, with all this emotion instead of a fearless clarity that, yeah, you don't have to agree with me, and I don't have to agree with you, and it doesn't mean that either one of us is wrong or in danger of hellfire. Um, so people essentially are worshiping their own beliefs, and then cognitive dissonance comes in and makes it a lot harder mentally to even make room for different opinions than our own. Um, and then this results in the chaos that we're now facing politically in the U.S. and otherwhere. But that's a topic on its own for another day. So what we're left with is uncertainty, and humans tend to hate uncertainty with some good reasons. Um, but that's the nature of the realm that we live in. It's not certain. You never know what's going to happen day to day, moment to moment, and when death will come to dance with us. So I conclude that the sooner we learn to traverse our own individual spiral, which is so unique and yet so much the same as all others, and simultaneously let every other living creature, every other human, do the same on their own cyclic path without interfering and trying to drag them away from their path to join you on yours. It's not going to work for anyone, and it's just completely unnecessary and uncalled for. Um, we're going to be a lot healthier and happier when we learn to do that, and that's collectively as a species. Religious wars will be done, and individually in our hearts we can be at peace, not needing anyone else to agree with us on our deeply held beliefs. So that is the conclusion for today. And I hope you guys are well, and I hope if you have any thoughts on this, please comment. I'd also love it if you are enjoying my ramblings, if you would subscribe and like. It does help me, but that's not really the point. So I don't mention it every time, and I don't plan to. Anyway, thank you so much, those of you who are with me on this journey, and every blessing to you all. Until next time.